things that Netflix handled especially well and features about big data that are interesting for us to consider. We mentioned mass customization and this notion of customer behavior modeling. One of the things that Netflix could do that Blockbuster could not is they could first determine, did you actually watch the movie? And technically, they don't know if you saw the screen. They knew if you played it. And they measured when you played it, the time of day. And it was really interesting that when phones came out that could play Netflix movies, and it was, of course, possible to open up a Netflix app on an iPhone or a Galaxy phone, that we recognized people were consuming media, especially in cities like New York and Chicago, all during the day. I guess they're supposed to be at work or they're on the train, right? And so there are lots of other places that now the media can be consumed. And maybe you don't have time for, The Godfather, but you have time for 15 minutes of something else. And I can begin to position that kind of content to you. And so now use of a computer, use of media can be measured very precisely. And so measuring the customer is valuable to Netflix, not simply because they want to get to the customer better, but this information says something about the whole media industry. If I'm a movie house, Sony or Universal or MGM or any one of those big ones, making a movie is a risky proposition. What makes a good movie? Well, it's not easy. You've got actors and you got to get all the kind of expenses and scenes and filming. And so nevertheless, if we went to Netflix, they could tell us, based on the aggregation of what people enjoy, what would make a good movie. They could also tell us, for a movie that was produced 20, 30, 40 years ago, who might actually want to watch that movie. And that's actually really interesting. I'd like to hone in on that example for a moment, because that's really about an asset. For a moment, if I'm CBS or I'm Sony or any of these companies that owns a movie from, say, the 80s, and you say, well, it's sitting on a shelf, literally. Now I take it and digitize it. So, well, I don't really want to spend a lot of money advertising this, but who would reuse this? Who would be interested in it? And we would think of this as marketing as sort of the long tail. That movie owned by CBS or Sony is an asset. Now Netflix has a view on the value of that asset. That's tremendous. Asset surveillance, that's a very important concept. In fact, it is part of a Nobel Prize in economics. And so when I think about data and the kind of data that Netflix has and other companies that I'd like to talk about today, their asset is data. In fact, if we were to buy Netflix, and I have this kind of joking conversation with one of my colleagues in accounting, and he said, well, of course, Russ, you buy the company, you do discounted cash flow analysis. We could probably hire someone here at Evercore to help us with this, and this is what Netflix would be worth. And fair enough, we'd come up with a number. I would argue that that number will be inflated, and of course we pay a premium to acquire a company, largely because of the potential of this data asset. There has never, in the history of media, been the creation of a data set that has 1 billion ratings on 120,000 movies. That information doesn't exist anywhere else. And you say, well, okay, YouTube and Hulu and other people are creating something like it. What's also interesting about these massive data sets that get created on industries, for economic reasons, we don't need two. Once we get one that's really big, there's not a need for a second or a third. And if there is a need for a second or a third, it's usually because there's some sort of price discrimination or some sort of coverage issue or something like that. So it's a winner-take-all model. I'll say a little bit about Netflix. I do some executive training for Microsoft in Redmond. They love Netflix, right? They are in a partnership with Netflix, and they look at Netflix as the kind of company that they would like to be able to be on the consumer side. They can measure the consumer, of course, what the consumer does with media. Did you watch the movie? Did you skip through a particular scene? Did you watch the scene a second time? All of those aspects, if you insert there for movies, any other form of media, sports, news, whatever that is, why do we watch any sports game or any television program that we don't want to watch today? I mean, with digital recording and all of the things that are possible, mass customization will feed us, I'm convinced, a customized stream of media. Customized in news, customized in sports. And I'll say a little bit about myself. I grew up in Florida, in Tampa. And we didn't have a lot of great years in football down there, but when we did, I'd watch those games again. And the NFL hasn't figured out how to charge that. But Netflix would know how to get to me and to you and whatever game or show you'd like to watch. Now, there are a few things about the data that Netflix is creating, dimensionality, that's very different. different than maybe what we had 10, 20 years ago. There's a velocity to this, and of course, that velocity is not unique to Netflix or media, so they know that you've done something, you log into the Netflix account, and quickly they have a set of recommendations available for you to respond to. Velocity in data is transforming lots of markets. Flash traders right here in New York and Chicago, real-time store offers. You walk into Target. Target's got a program with Wheel Cart, and so they determine it's your phone, that phone's been in before, they want to send a special message just to you based on your being in the store or where you have been before. That kind of real-time offer is becoming more commonplace. I think of this also in the dimension of precision. So one of the things that Netflix knows, and I think it must scare Nielsen tremendously, they know in particular your name, your address, the number of people in your house. And if you watch cartoons like we do in my house, that you have kids. Now, when Nielsen builds their graphics and data for all of the views, okay, these families have a demographic profile, they use an average and they use something about a zip code and all of that. What's interesting about Netflix is I've exposed all that information to Netflix. They know that perfectly. And so they don't have to make an assumption. They don't have to make any approximation. That precision is already there. And so if Netflix wanted to partner with, well, most any kind of company, or maybe even a political campaign to say, I'd like to find families that live in urban areas or suburban areas, or whatever that happens to be, with children that watch certain types of shows and may have, particular views, they could do that with great precision. Another concept that I find exciting in the area of big data is what I call the fusion of data. And the example that I find most interesting here that we've probably all somehow participated in is Zillow. So if you go to Zillow, you put in your address, and it has a number for your house. And if that number is not sufficiently high to make you feel good, then you think Zillow sucks, okay? And then, the other way you use Zillow is, what's this person at work making? So you put in their address, you divide by 5, and you get their annual salary, okay? Sort of the banker's check on what your income might be. But, and Zillow says we have this fantastic algorithm that measures the value of your house, and on a weekly basis, you can get Zillow updates that say your house went up 2% or 1%. And I find it as a statistician particularly difficult to appreciate, okay? But what I do think is fantastic and a tremendous accomplishment is they have taken hundreds of thousands of municipalities and counties all over America, publicly available information, taken that and fused it with the information that you might load up and say, hey, here's a really nice picture of my house and my bathroom, and I'm trying to sell my house. That has never been done before. That ability to bring information on properties at a scale. And it's no surprise that they bought Trulia, and, well, we don't need 5 of these, right? Redfin's still around, but we're not going to have a huge number of these. There will be 1 or 2. And so if you need information about properties, they are in a tremendous position to provide that. Now, it's interesting when you think about data, and at least the way I think about it, it leads you to various dilemmas. And here's a little toy example that I like to start us off with. Suppose I own a billboard. I'm the company, CBS or whoever, who actually owns the physical billboard. And you say, what's this billboard worth? And you say, well, I'd like to count the number of people who see it each day. And I could call your Department of Transportation and probably get a very inadequate response. And maybe I'd hire some unemployed students or something like that and have them count cars, and that would be, even more useless. What's interesting about this dilemma, somebody knows that by accident. Verizon knows that. AT&T knows that. The fact that we drive up and down the highway or walk up and down the street by a billboard that can be described by longitude and latitude, a location, their operation of the cellular network could be, that data could be inverted to say, I want to look at all the people in a period of time that transgressed that longitude, latitude. What's also interesting about them is they have all the information, dimensionality that Netflix has. Precision, they know your name. They know where you live. They know other places you go. They know if you're a visitor from out of town. That all sorts of things that would suggest they know who watches that billboard. But no one asked them to do this. They ended up in this, I said, by accident, because they're just running a really good cellular network. So they have a view potentially on the value of this asset, of this billboard. And this is actually economically a very serious dilemma. What should they do with this data? One, they could sell the data to the billboard company. You say, wow, that's interesting. CBS would probably sue them and say, listen, you shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff on my assets. I didn't give you permission to conduct asset surveillance. They might say, you know, what we should do is have an auction. Just let whoever wants to buy it pay us the highest price. That's another possibility. They could go to the marketing companies that advertise on the billboard and say, I'm going to help you pick better billboards, and create a consulting company or some sort of firm that would advise them on location analysis. They could do another thing. They could keep it private and just start a billboard company and go around America and say, that billboard is underpriced. CBS, would you like to sell it? Oh, fantastic. I didn't know you wanted to get rid of billboards. We're interested in a few billboards. Now, the board and shareholders of Verizon and AT&T would probably be aghast that they would end up in businesses so tangential to that of the cellular network that they probably would put a halt to it. But you see, this is how Google operates. When Google says, I have a new data asset, I form a new business around it. And if it's a map or a car or healthcare or banking or whatever that is, I just get into a new business. And why am I in that business? I'm in that business because I have information about assets that other people don't. That's very powerful.